Hi everyone, Elsie Jensen here. Today we are going to make an Italian chickpea soup with chicken, zucchini, carrots, celery, all this deliciousness, and then some grilled cheeses and some sourdough discard banana muffins because I've got some really brown bananas. So let's start by getting our onions sauteing while we prep our banana muffins. So I do have my oven preheated to 400 degrees. Now today I'm using a red onion instead of a yellow onion. I would have preferred a yellow onion, but I am out. So we're substituting in the red. And the red will work. It just doesn't have quite as nice of an onion flavor as the yellow. Red onions are better eaten raw than they are cooked. So we'll be tossing them in and we're going to saute them up, caramelize them, bring out their flavor for our Italian chickpea soup. Okay, let me turn on. I'm going to put it on at about a 6. We're going to get these onions in here. We're going to start to have them saute. Okay, give this a nice little stir. Coat those onions up. And then let's start working on our muffins so they can start to bake. Okay, I have 4 very ripe bananas. If you had 3 really big ones, that would work, but these are kind of small. We're going to put them in here. And we're going to start mashing them up, and then we'll add some sugar. So just going to squeeze them in. Now, if you're making banana bread or banana muffins, you want to have very ripe bananas or like overripe bananas because that is when they are the sweetest. If they're ripe or underripe, they won't be good for banana bread. There we go. And while they look unappetizing on the outside, they will be delicious in banana bread. Throw this away. And we're going to give these a quick little mix with my mixer until they're kind of soupy. And then we'll add in 1 cup of sugar. So we're just going to blend them up. And when you have really ripe bananas, they're going to get soupy really fast. There we go. Perfect. So now we're going to add in 1 cup of sugar. And you want to use white sugar for this. Okay. Perfect. I'm going to just clear this guy out of the way since these tubs are a little big. And then I'm going to give this a nice blend and mix it up until all of the sugar has kind of dissolved into the banana. And this is going to be for our sourdough discard muffins, since we needed to really use up those bananas, because I don't know if anyone else's kids are like mine, but one week they love bananas, the next week they don't eat them at all. So give them a good milk and mix up here. And now you're going to have kind of like a banana soup in here, which is very runny, which is what we want. Okay, we're going to add in 1 stick of melted butter and then 2 eggs. Oop, shell in there. Perfect. And 1 more egg. And then we're going to give this, again, another little mix until it is ready. And then I'm going to stir while this is mixing. I'm going to stir my onions just a little bit for our Italian chickpea soup. There we go. And that was quite a stir there. I'm not sure how that happened. Okay, got our eggs incorporated. You want to make sure the yolks get completely incorporated in. Same with the whites, because this is the time to mix them. Once you add the flour in, you don't want to over mix your batter or you'll get a stiff muffin. And we like a nice soft muffin. Okay, we're going to add in 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract. So 1, 2. And then we are going to add in 2 tablespoons of cream. 1, 2, and then a 1/2 cup of sourdough discard. So I'm going to take it off. I'm going to give mine a nice stir. So in case there's any little hooch at the top, I can mix it right in. And then we're going to use 1/2 cup of sourdough discard. This is a great recipe to use to get rid of some of your discard so you're not wasting it. We're going to mix that in here, and it helps the muffins stay really moist, and it just gives that nice little tart sourdough flavor that like becomes a little bit more prominent like with each day. Let's give these a nice stir. Don't want them to burn. Perfect. Put my sourdough out of the way just so I don't knock them. And now we're going to mix all of these ingredients up, and this is all the wet ingredients. So then what we're going to do is we're going to add our salt and our baking powder, and then we'll add in our flour. Okay. So we are going to add in a 1/2 teaspoon of salt, and then 2 teaspoons of baking powder. So not baking soda, but baking powder. 1 and 2. We're going to give this a nice mix until all of that baking powder has been completely incorporated into the mix. And I like to do it this way instead of taking the time to sift the baking powder and the salt into the flour. If I do it into the wet ingredients right before I add the flour, it does a great job of making sure it gets completely dispersed. Okay. Next, we are going to add in the flour, and we need 2 cups of flour, or not 2 cups, 1.5 cups of all-purpose flour. So, and you don't want to use bread flour or self-rising flours. 1 and a 1/2 cups of all-purpose flour. There we go. And then we're going to give a nice little mix. Let's stir these onions up. They smell delicious, and they're starting to caramelize, which will be perfect for our soup. Now, we're going to mix in this flour, but we don't want to overmix. So once it starts to get kind of lumpy and you don't see any big pockets of flour, stop mixing. We'll do the rest of a spatula, but you just don't want to overmix your batter because it will lead to a stiff muffin. And you want it to be nice and fluffy. Okay. So we've got a nice chunky batter. I'm going to go through with a spatula and get it all, like all the flour incorporated. But I'm all done with my mixers. So I'm just going to take my spatula here, and I'm just going to scoop around just like this. And that way, you don't overmix. Because if you want a lumpy batter, if you overmix, it's just like you got a hard muffin. Okay. I'm going to put my liners in. I like to use foil liners. I think they just cook up a little nicer than parchment ones. But again, I don't know if there's any science behind it, or it's just my personal preference. There we go. And I'm going to take a nice metal spoon to scoop out my batter because I find it works just better to scoop it out than to use a spatula because it just falls off a bit nicer. So I'm going to go over and I'm going to fill up 9 of mine all the way to where I want them, and then I'm going to mix a little bit of nuts in my last 3 ones because most people don't like nuts in their banana muffins in our house. But I do, and I have a couple others. So we're just going to make a couple with nuts so that the children are appeased. And that way I can also pack it in their lunch for school since they have like a nut-free school. Or it's not completely nut-free, but if there's a nut allergy, they want them to be nut-free. Okay. And I like to fill my muffins all the way up to the top. I like a nice dome on my muffin, give you that nice kind of bakery feel to it versus one that just goes a little bit. I want a dome. Perfect. And here it's sizzling up nicely. Beautiful. The best thing with stews is to make sure your onions get a nice caramelization on it. You just can't get that flavor once you start adding in other things. So I always cook my onions for about 5 minutes until they start to get nice and brown. It makes for the best like stews. You could really brings out that onion flavor. Okay, we've got our muffins here. Now I'm going to take some walnuts. I love walnuts. We don't need much because we're just doing it for 3 muffins. So I'm just going to take about a handful out of chopped walnuts and we're just going to mix it in. If you wanted to do it for the whole batch, you'd use probably about a cup. Now let's give this a quick mix and then we're going to fill up our remaining ones and then we're going to let it bake at 400 for about 16 or so minutes. Sometimes depending just on how full they get, it might need a little bit more, but I find when at 400, it's about 15, 16 minutes. And you don't want to over bake your muffin. If you over bake a muffin, then they'll be dry. So always air and put it a little bit less because you can always add more time, but you can't take away. And that's what I do when I'm baking anything. I always set my timer for a little bit before so I can check on it. Okay, let's put these guys in the oven. Again, we have our oven set to 400 degrees. We're gonna pop them right in here. And I find having a slightly higher temperature when baking the muffins at 400 versus 375 leads to a nicer like dome. So I'm gonna set my timer for 15 minutes and we'll come and check on them. And now let's start making our stew. Now that our onions have a lovely caramelization in it, I'm gonna pull some up for you guys to see. You've got some nice browning on them. It's hard to tell since they are red onions, but they've got a lovely caramelization on it. So we're gonna add in our celery. This is about 5 stalks, although since these aren't full stalks, it's closer to 4. And then I'm gonna cut them in half because they're fairly big and I don't want any huge pieces of any vegetables in my soup. Since we have a lot, I want it to be a nice medley. So I'm going to first cut them all in half, and then we're just going to give them medley. So I'm going to first cut them all in half, and then we're just going to give them, slice them down. I would say maybe like 1/4 of an inch, not too big. And then we'll add this in with our onions and let this start to saute as well while we prep our carrots. Perfect. I'll give this a toss. And this is for our Italian chickpea soup. So we're going to use some nice kind of herbs that are, reminiscent of Italian cooking. And then we'll have our chickpeas in there as a protein as well as some chicken. Okay. We've got 3 carrots. We're going to give them a nice peel because they're full ones and this just won't taste. It will be chewy and it has a kind of a like a earthier taste to it. So always give them a nice peel to get that the sweeter part of the carrot exposed, and it will just taste better in your soups and have a better texture. Okay, we'll peel this guy up. And let's get here. Perfect. And then I'm going to chop off the tops, and then these are kind of towards the ends, I'm going to cut them in half, but the other, like the bottoms where they're fairly thin, I'm just going to leave them. So we're going to chop them and then I'll quarter them because I don't want to have a super huge chunk of carrot in there, especially since carrots take a little bit longer to cook. You're going to want them a little bit smaller so that they cook up nicely and are nice and tender like with the rest of your veggies. So we're just going to have them. And just make sure you have a firm hold on your carrot when you have it so it doesn't slip and slide. There we go. And we're going to add these to our celery and our red onions. And this is going to be kind of it's going to help create the nice flavor to our broth as well. Okay, let's put a nice spoonful of garlic in, about 1 to 2 cloves. I would say half a teaspoon. We're going to let that saute up nicely. And then we're going to chop up a zucchini while we wait for those to get a nice little browning on them. So I'm going to quarter my zucchini and then I'm going to slice it up because you don't want to have huge slices in your soup. So I've got them quartered and then I'm just going to do them a little bit fatter than I would if I was slicing them as a whole thing so that they're kind of just like a nice zucchini chunk. Perfect. But we're going to wait to add those in. Nice up. Let's grab some of our herbs so we can start to season them because I like to add my herbs in before I add my broth. So we're going to put 1 bay leaf in, but I like to crush up the bay leaf when I'm doing like a short like cooked soup, one that's done in like 30 minutes or less. That way the flavor can really diffuse and come out. And when you crush it up so small, you don't notice it. Versus when it's a big leaf, it gets hard. So we've got 1 bay leaf crushed up. We're going to add in about a half a teaspoon of black pepper. And we're going to add in some dried oregano, about a teaspoon. And let's get some of our fresh herbs. We have some rosemary, which it's supposed to be fresh, but it's kind of self-dried on its own. So I'm going to just pull it off, and then we're going to give it a nice kind of chop up of it. So it's I want to get enough leaves for about 1 sprig. Even though I watered it, it seemed to dry out. It's just, I can't mimic the natural outside. And then this is fresh thyme. So I'm going to just try to pull off some of these leaves of my fresh thyme as well, trying not to get any of the stems or the stalks just because they won't cook up and get tender in the soup. Perfect. There we go. I'm going to add it. So I have about, look at all the thyme leaves are falling there, about a half a teaspoon of fresh thyme and about a half a teaspoon of fresh rosemary. And I'm going to give it a nice chop up, although it's more like a self-dried. Then we're going to add this in and we're going to give it a nice stir so that the heat and then that oil in there that we put in the beginning will help bring out the flavors, which will make a nicer broth for our stew. We're going to let that cook. And then...
You have a question about the bay leaf, asking if it doesn't create a problem since you crushed it up.
It doesn't create a problem because I've crushed it so small that it just tastes like any other spice in there. Like you don't get a hard, crunchy texture from it. I'm going to add in about a tablespoon of, maybe tablespoon and a half of of tomato paste. We're gonna let this saute up. I know when the leaves stay big, you fish them out at the end just because it's a hard leaf. But when I crush it up, I never noticed it. And it really, I think, helps bring out the flavor a little bit better than just leaving it in when I'm doing a slow or like a quick stew. So, and I know you can actually buy crushed bay leaves somewhere, but I find I've never gotten like a chunk of leaf in my mouth that has like bothered me. Okay, it's like no different than I kind of like using rosemary or thyme, that really aren't finely ground spices. Okay, let's get that going, and let's put our zucchini in. And then we're going to get ready to add our chicken broth so that it can start to simmer. And then we'll add in our kale, our chickpeas, and our chicken in a little bit. But I like to let the broth simmer in before we add those in just quite yet. Okay, I've got all of my zucchini covered with the nice seasoned tomato paste. And then we're going to use about 4 cups of water with a big heaping scoop of chicken bouillon. Now you could use straight up chicken broth if you wanted to, but then you'll probably need to add a bit more salt to the soup. I use just chicken bouillon, and it always adds enough saltiness for me. I like it a little bit better than broth because it just has more flavor, because I can add more bouillon than I have liquid, but you can't do that with chicken broth. Okay, we're gonna add a nice big scoop to our soup, and we're gonna let this stew for a little bit while we start prepping our grilled cheeses. So there we go. Give it a stir to help that start to dissolve. Okay, I'm gonna bring this stuff over for our grilled cheeses. We're gonna use up kind of the rest of our sourdough tonight. We'll be baking up our 2 sourdoughs. We have the Italian herbs and cheese we made up, and as well as our basic ones. But I'm going to clear off my space just a little bit here to make it easier. Okay, so we're going to make 2 different sandwiches today. I'm going to make a Gouda and smoked Gouda on our Guinness bread, which I think sounds just so delicious. And then I'm going to make a, I believe, smoked cheddar and pepper jack with roast beef on the other one. Let's grab a little bit of softened butter. Let's start cutting it up. You see how this wasn't made with whole wheat flour at all? The brownness really just came from the Guinness. And it's not overpowering, but it is lovely. And it's just, all I did was substitute Guinness for water in our sourdough recipe. And then this is our basic sourdough. Okay. See, and this is why we've got to bake up, because we are down to nothing. I feel like every 2 days we're creating 2 more loaves here in our house, because everybody loves it. I'm gonna cut this a little bit thinner right here, because if you make it too thick, you'll never get your cheese melted. Okay, we're gonna spread a little bit of butter on one side of each slice of the bread. Get that milk off there. And you don't need much butter, but use softened butter like room temperature because it spreads easier. And then I'm going to turn on my skillet to start it warming up at about a 6. And then for the Guinness bread, our first layer is going to be some smoked Gouda, and then I have some regular Gouda, because I love Gouda. It's my favorite, and I think it makes a great grilled cheese. So we're gonna make this extra cheesy. Okay, so I've got a layer of Gouda for this one. And then let's do our smoked cheddar layer on this one. And might have to steal a little bit of pepper jack just to fill out the gap. There we go. Okay. And then we're going to do some roast beef on the one that's cheddar. It's going to be smoked cheddar, pepper jack, and then roast beef. And those will all kind of work together to make a delicious sandwich. You don't want to make your meat too thick. Otherwise, you won't ever melt your cheese. Perfect. Now, if you do want a really meaty grilled cheese, all I would suggest is to heat up your meat a little bit so that it will melt. Okay. or you could do them in the oven. A lot of times when I'm making grilled cheeses for a large batch, like if we're going to do it with my family, and since we are 7 with our, 5 kids, and then I'll do it in the oven because then I can make a lot more than I can make on this, and I could do it all in like 3 minutes. Okay, we got this there. I'm going to do the layer of yep. Okay, let's do this layer of Gouda on this other one. Perfect. And I think I have just one more. We'll just use it all up. Delicious. Now, don't forget to put a little bit of butter on the other side of your bread. And perfect. These are going to be so delicious to also like dip in our soup. It's one of my favorite things to do. I'm like a soup and sandwich girl. I love to like dip my sandwich in the soup. It's just so delicious. Okay, let's get that cooking. Let me get my fish spatula. This is the best one for grilled cheeses. But while that is working, let's get on our soup here. Give it a nice stir. You can see steam is starting to come out. So we're going to start prepping the rest of the stuff to go in here. We're going to use 1 can of chickpeas. And we're going to drain them, and then I'm going to give them a quick rinse because they're in kind of like a slimy liquid, which is the natural starches from the chickpeas. But I like to wash it off so that it doesn't change the consistency of our broth. And give it a good shake. Here we go. We're going to add those right into our soup. Let's give it a nice stir. And they're going to add a nice, protein, but chickpeas have like a little bit of a crunch to them. They're not super soft like a bean. They have a little bit harder flavor, or like texture, but it's a nice. The carrots and the celery, it complements it well. Okay, let's prep our chicken. Oh, before we do, let's go check on our muffins and see how they are cooking. Hopefully they're done. If not, they might need a minute or two. Oh, I think they might be done. Let's give them a little test. Perfect. They're nice and firm at the top, which is when you know they're done. If they're still gooey, like, where your finger goes in, then you want them to bake a little bit longer. But look how beautiful these muffins look. And these are our sourdough discard muffins. We'll put them right here. Sourdough, what did I say? Sourdough discard banana muffins. And then we put some walnuts in our last one. But delicious, beautiful, a great way to use up your old bananas. Okay, let's check on our grilled cheeses, see how they are warming up, and see if they're ready for their first turn. Yep, we've got our butter melted. So we're going to do our first turn. And this is so that we can melt the butter on the other side and start to heat up that bread. Okay, let's get our chicken ready. So this is just good old Costco's rotisserie chicken. You can buy it in I think it's like a 2.5 pound bag. I think it's like wonderful for like making soups and stuff on the fly where you don't have to like boil your own chicken and shred it. So we're just going to give it a nice chop up, and then we're going to add this to our soup as well. There we go. And this is already pre-cooked and everything, but this is just a great way to make things go a little bit faster when you're trying to get your meals out for your family. And I want to say probably 3/4 of a pound there because we had the beans in there, and this soup's only about like a 4 to 5 portion soup. There we go. Give it a nice stir. I don't add my chicken in the beginning because with already cooked chicken that's been shredded. If you put it in there too long to boil, it will continue to shred, and then you'll have just a really stringy soup. So I like to put it in towards the end of our cooking time. I'm gonna give my hands a quick wash because they are covered in chicken. And we're gonna just prep our last little vegetables to go in. We're gonna add some kale, and then at the very end, we're gonna add some green onions, which will give a lovely onion flavor. But before that simmer, I'm just gonna give it a nice little taste to make sure that it is ready to go. Perfect. I always just make sure that you taste it to make sure it's got the nice saltiness that you want, and so you don't have to add any more in. Let's add in, we're gonna start with one big handful of baby kale. Now you could use regular kale, but you'll just wanna give it a nice chop up. Baby kale is nice because you can just put it in there, and then we're gonna let it wilt a little bit before we add any more in. Give it a nice stir. Beautiful. And one thing I love about kale over spinach is it kind of keeps its form better than when you add it to a soup. Spinach really wilts away and kind of disappears, but kale at least keeps its form a lot better. Okay. Turn it down. I'm going to rotate it because this side's a little bit hotter and I want that guy to get a little heat. Okay, are we ready? Give it a stir. But do you see how it was so big, and then once you add it in, it doesn't look like there's hardly any kale in there? That's what it looks like. You can add so much spinach or kale to a soup, and it just deflates down to nothing. Put it in. Okay, we'll stir this guy. I just like to kind of first push them all underneath the broth. That way, and then to stir it. That way they don't get all clumped together. Beautiful. And this one, it's such a great, it's not a heavy, it's a very filling soup, but it's not like you don't feel, it's not super heavy. It's not a cream based. It's really healthy for you. It's a great soup when we're going to be pairing it with our grilled cheese, but it is a great for filling meal that hits like all their vegetables that you can imagine in it. Okay, perfect. Now let's chop up our green onions. So I'm just going to take off the kind of the flimsy tips of my onions, the ones that, because they've been picked, they've been losing their water and they just get really stringy in the soup. And then we're going to do a really small slice. And I like to add this at the very end because the onion flavor stays and it just adds a really, really delicious flavor to it. Just a nice bright pop. It's the same thing like when you add fresh parsley at the very end. It gives you that nice fresh, burst of flavor to the broth. And then I'm not going to use the whiter parts for this because they won't cook down and they'll be a bit chewy if you put them in. Okay. Perfect. Give this a nice stir again. And then let's check on our grilled cheeses here. Excellent. It's getting a nice crisp up. Beautiful. Okay, let's sprinkle in our green onions here and then we can serve up. So we'll just put them in and then you just want to give them a nice mix. And you see they, along with the kale, they added just a nice, really great pop of color, but the flavor is what you want. It just gives you that lovely onion flavor. Perfect. Okay, let me get my plate and a bowl. Get my little cauldron. Okay. And let me get a ladle for our soup. Okay. We're gonna put our lovely, this is the roast beef and pepper jack and cheddar melt. Delicious. And now we're gonna fill up our soup bowl with our lovely Italian chickpea soup. Nice dollop of broth. And then what I love to do with this soup at the very end, we're just gonna add a little bit of shredded Swiss and Gruyere cheese just to the very top, and it will just melt in and adds just this nice little cheesy note to it. Well, guys, we are done. We made our sourdough discard banana muffins. We made our grilled cheeses and our delicious Italian chickpea soup. So we got a lot accomplished in like 30 minutes or so. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and feel free to message or comment if you have any cooking questions. We love to help you guys answer those, or if you have any recipes you'd like to see us try to make. Again, thanks so much for joining us. Don't forget to like and subscribe.